This is the Dollemore Daily, and I'm Jesse Dollemore. Joe Rogan, the podcaster and MMA commentator and comedian, is a lot of things. Multi-millionaire. He's a lot of things. But one thing he is not is someone to whom you should go to for information about the vaccine, for interpretation of heavy scientific research papers. And the other day, he went on his podcast with the guy who owns a coffee company, not an epidemiologist, not a virologist, not a doctor, not even a scientist. And he read from the abstract, one single sentence from the abstract of a study about vaccines. Now, my co-host and I of my podcast, I Doubt It podcast, a couple days ago, 3 days ago or so, we sat down and we recorded episode 745 of our show, where we addressed his interpretation, his misinterpretation. And then just yesterday, after we had done what we did, the author of that study, I'm going to read from this Forbes article entitled, "Joe Rogan is getting this completely wrong," says the scientist who conducted the vaccine study. And what is going to follow here, very briefly, after I'm done running my mouth, is that segment from our show. I would encourage you to watch the whole thing, one, because it's good for me that you watch it, but also it's going to be good for you to get the real information about, one, just science literacy in general, but also about this vaccine misinformation, this push by idiots on the other side of the aisle, and I consider Joe Rogan one of them, to sow discontent and disinformation and hesitancy, doubt, fear in the minds of people about the vaccine, which is safe, which is free, which is helping curb this global pandemic that we've been saddled with for over a year. I'm going to read from this article, 2 brief paragraphs, and then I'm just going to cut to the clip. Joe Rogan's public misrepresentation of a 2015 vaccine study has gone viral. His misunderstanding of the study leads Rogan to wrongly conclude that vaccinating people against COVID-19 will increase the chances of some hyper-virulent mutation. You can watch the video below. Before you do, the lead scientist and author of the study, who spent 10 years conducting this research, has something to say because he is horrified. The lead author of the study that Joe Rogan's quoting from as though he has any science literacy whatsoever has something to say. Quote, "Joe Rogan is getting this completely wrong," says Andrew Reed, professor of biology and entomology at Pennsylvania State. "He's taking very careful work about evolutionary scenarios of the future, and from that, erroneously concluding that people should not be vaccinated now." Now, the clip below that they reference in this article, you don't need to go and read below because I play clips from his podcast in the clip you're getting ready to watch. Buckle up. And if you're a Joe Rogan fan, drop defenses of him. Watch this with an open mind and take him for what he is, which is an entertainer, which is a fight commentator, a funnyman, not a dispenser of scientific health information. Anyway, I would invite you to subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, on Google Podcasts, on Spotify, because we don't film every single episode. Anyway, thanks for sticking around. I'd love to know what you think. And there's going to be phone numbers dropped in the clip, but also you can comment below. I appreciate you guys. And the other side of this same coin is a guy like Joe Rogan, who people looked up to. They look up to.
I was like, why are you saying past tense?
It was I can't talk very well sometimes.
Because you read these comments, and I'll tell you, it's a little scary. It's a little cult-like. Yeah, people do. Little Jonestown.
They do look up to Joe Rogan as though he's the everyman's philosopher or he is peddling woo on an almost episode by episode basis, and people are looking up to him. And here's a prime example of that. Here's Joe Rogan with his guest, the Trump-supporting dingus born in the same town I was born in northern Idaho. What's his name? It's right here. Evan Hafer. He's the founder and CEO of Black Rifle Coffee, a Trump dummy. And talking.
Wait, what is he on there to talk about?
I have no idea, but why is...
No, he's on there to talk about vaccines, right. And he's the CEO of a coffee company.
Right, and he not educated, not an epidemiologist, not a doctor, not even a medical professional. He's a coffee guy who happens to be a veteran from... Anyway, this is just as dangerous, just maybe more dangerous than the Greg Locks of the world, because Greg Locke doesn't have the audience that Joe Rogan does.
And this is the same guy that just passed this fucking law in New York City where you have to have a vaccine passport to go everywhere. You have to have a vaccine to go to a restaurant, to a gym, to any place where people gather. It is crazy. And meanwhile, the biggest percentage of people that don't have vaccines or have been vaccinated are people of color. So this guy, people of color and immigrants, this is what he's always supposed to be pro people of color, pro diversity, pro immigration. Those are the people that don't have vaccines. And now you're precluding them from going to gyms and restaurants. And what about the people working in the restaurants? What about all these? It's fucking madness. And then you have a bunch of people that are supporting it. Like, yay, finally. Meanwhile, you have science that's coming out. There's legitimate articles. Jamie, I'll send this to you now. There's legitimate because doctors have been sending me these things. And, this is neither pro nor con vaccine. This is not a judgment statement. But imperfect vaccination can enhance the transmission of highly virulent pathogens. Right. So this is a scientific paper from 2015 that shows that here's what an important quote: vaccines that keep the host alive but still allow transmission can thus allow virulent strains to circulate in a population. So vaccines that don't kill the virus, vaccines that allow people, like this is one of the things we're finding out about what they're calling breakthrough cases. Right. So people who are vaccinated can still get COVID and they can still transmit COVID. Mm-hmm. This recently happened at the Comedy Store. A vaccinated comedian gave COVID to like 12 different fucking people at the Comedy Store. Some of them vaccinated, some of them not. That situation where the vaccine just kind of protects you from serious damage, right? But it protects you from really being like badly hospitalized or death, but doesn't stop you from getting the virus, can possibly lead to more potent viruses. So these people that are saying, oh, it's these unvaccinated people that are responsible for the variants. Well, there's actually scientific papers that point to the very sort of environment that we're creating by having so many people vaccinated with a vaccine that doesn't kill off the virus. It actually can lead to more potent viruses. Try finding that story anywhere.
Okay, so...
Try finding that story anywhere.
There's a lot here, so buckle in. Number one, this story, quote unquote, a variation of this story was in NPR in February of this year. And we're going to be playing audio from that coverage from an NPR journalist in discussion with a scientist, which is not...
Wait. Are you sure he wasn't talking to a guy who owns a coffee company?
That is not what NPR did.
See, well, the NPR dropped the ball because clearly the preeminent expert in vaccines and epidemiology and virology is a guy from Lewiston, Idaho, who owns a coffee company.
So the line that Joe Rogan read, yes, it's from a research article. Imperfect vaccination can enhance the transmission of highly virulent pathogens. Now, I spent more time reading this than I wanted to today, but I wanted to find where did he get that quote that he read? How much of this study did he read? Was it in the middle of the study? Like, was it deep in the results section? Like, where was it?
Can I answer? Can I guess?
Sure. Where was it?
Oh, I don't know, but it wasn't in the middle. That's my guess.
No, it was the third sentence in the abstract. In the abstract.
Wow.
Okay?
Wow.
Now, the next
The
sentence...
abstract, by the way.
I'm going to read the sentence again, and then I'm going to read the sentence after the sentence that Joe Rogan read, okay? Here we go. Vaccines that keep hosts alive but still allow transmission could thus allow very virulent strains to circulate in a population. Here we show experimentally that immunization of chickens against Marek's disease virus enhances the fitness of more virulent strains, making it possible for hypopathogenic strains to transmit.
Wait a minute. This is a study about chickens?
In chickens. A disease called Marek's disease.
Joe Rogan really going deep on the research about vaccines and trying to foment distrust with the vaccine by reading a study about the chickens.
Well, no. That's a lot of credit. Let's say reading the abstract of a study. I believe that's the extent of what happened there. But Marek's disease is a highly contagious viral disease in chickens. So that is what this study is about.
So it wasn't about the Delta variant. It wasn't about the coronavirus. It wasn't even about a coronavirus.
No.
It was about chickens
And Marek's disease and vaccines. So that would have been important context for millions of people to know, I think.
Yeah.
When you're giving this information that is provoking skepticism in people who haven't been vaccinated about whether or not it's really important for them to get vaccinated. Well, there's a potential that it could make things worse.
Yeah.
If I get vaccinated.
I mean, if you're a chicken.
Yeah. So when I was in grad school, and here I want to give important context here because Joe Rogan didn't do that, and I want to make sure that I do that. So I have a Master of Science in Clinical Psychology, and my master's thesis was looking at the differences in moral values of atheists, deists, and theists. So, like, my specialty is not poultry disease or
medical shit at all.
No medicine or no medical stuff, but I have been trained in how to do research and read research articles and determine validity. And I can't do that with this article. I'll just be straight up. I read it. A lot of it goes over my head. A lot of it is confusing.
Well, let me say this. If it's going over your head, a numbnuts like Joe Rogan, who's not trained in science literacy, it's certainly going over his head, without a doubt.
Yeah. So typically the most important section that I have found to read when you are reading a research article is the discussion section, because in the discussion, researchers are supposed to talk about the limitations to their research. They're supposed to put it in context.
Sure. It's not the abstract.
Right. It's the context of what are the limitations of this study? What are the limitations when it comes to the population? Did you do a survey of Psych 101 students and that's where your data came from? Because what does that say about how this will generalize to the population? Was this a correlational finding rather than a causality? Those are things that are going to come up in the discussion.
This just in from the participants of the study. Oh, you don't say. Very good to know. Very good to know.
So one thing that I liked,
fucking chickens.
One thing that I liked in the discussion section of this paper is that they do discuss the limitations of this. And there's two sentences that I want to read here. And it says, quote, "Our data do not demonstrate that vaccination was responsible for the evolution of hyperpathogenic strains of Marek's disease, and we may never know for sure why they evolved in the first place. Clearly, many potentially relevant ecological pressures on virulence have changed with the intensification of the poultry industry." And then they go into various factors that could have influenced some of the findings. And this is, again, like context that didn't come up in this conversation of this paper. Now, Joe Rogan...
He probably didn't get there. He only read that third sentence And then that was it.
Yeah, and again, this is kind of what's irresponsible about having such a large platform. So you put up a screenshot on your YouTube video of a scientific paper. You read the third sentence of the abstract. You give a brief summary of what that could then say about COVID-19 when this isn't related to COVID-19, and you don't say any of that. It's about chickens, and you're not giving any of that context. You're just using that third sentence in the abstract of a study from 2015 about chickens to support your view about COVID-19 vaccines with millions of people. I mean, could you get any more irresponsible?
Well, it's either just vapid ignorance, or it's because he knows it's going to get clicked. He knows it's going to cause a fervor among his audience. It's good for ratings. It's good for the show. I don't know. I'm not going to make a judgment call on what it is. I would lean toward him just being a dumb guy, but I don't know.
Well, again, so he said, look for this out there in the world. You're hearing it here first on the Joe Rogan Experience, and you'll only hear it here. Well, no. If you're interested in the idea of whether vaccines can drive the evolution of COVID-19 variations, then NPR covered that in February of 2021. And we're going to play a 4-minute interview that goes in depth on this issue. And this is kind of a lesson in how this discussion should have happened.
The new coronavirus variants have raised concerns about whether vaccines will remain effective against this disease. So far, the vaccines still seem to work, although scientists are keeping a close eye on a variant first seen in South Africa. But the vaccines themselves could drive the evolution of more mutants. However, NPR science correspondent Richard Harris reports that's not cause for alarm.
You may have heard that bacteria can develop resistance to antibiotics and, in a worst-case scenario, render the drugs useless. Something similar can also happen with vaccines, though with less serious consequences. This worry has arisen mostly in the debate over whether to delay a second vaccine shot so more people can get the first shot quickly. Paul Benash, a Howard Hughes investigator at the Rockefeller University, says that gap would leave people with only partial immunity for longer than necessary.
They might serve as sort of a breeding ground for the virus to acquire new mutations.
That's because the virus is always mutating, and if one happens to produce a mutation that makes it less vulnerable to the vaccine, that virus could simply multiply in a vaccinated individual. But even if that happens, that's only one step in the process.
What's really unclear and really quite important for the virus to evolve is whether those people that, having been vaccinated and infected, whether they have sufficient levels of virus replication to pass the virus on to other people.
If the vaccine keeps virus levels low, even mutated viruses, the infected person won't produce enough to spread to other people. Unfortunately, at the moment, scientists can't answer the most basic questions about this process. How much does the virus actually replicate inside a person who has been vaccinated, with either one dose or two? And how effective is that vaccine at limiting infection enough so that the virus levels stay low and prevent the spread to other people? Andrew Reed at Penn State University says whatever the answers may be, vaccine resistance, or escape as it's called, isn't nearly as scary as bacteria becoming resistant to antibiotics.
I know everybody's worried about it, but I would say history tells us that vaccine escape does not erode to zero. It does not erase vaccine protection.
A vaccine may become less potent, but in other cases where this has happened, it still works.
It's often got very strong anti-disease properties, so you get less sick even with the viruses that are around.
And this evolutionary pressure is present for any vaccine that doesn't completely block infection. So it's not just an issue for people who are between their initial shot and a booster. Many vaccines, apparently including the COVID vaccines, do not completely prevent a virus from multiplying inside someone, even though these vaccines do prevent serious illness.
I do think there are a lot of options here for trying to deal with any evolution should it occur.
One thing that helps is that dozens of vaccines are being developed and more than half a dozen are already in use.
One of the great things about having a lot of vaccine options is we might end up with a population which is heterogeneously vaccinated. You might get the AstraZeneca and I'm going to get one of the mRNA ones. That'll really help hinder the spread of mutants that are good at any one of those.
A virus that has evolved to get around one vaccine is likely to be stopped by another, and that will limit the spread of mutant strains. Drug makers are also keeping a close eye on mutants and are already formulating new vaccines that will be more effective if it turns out the original vaccines weaken too much. Paul Benash says this is not a crisis.
We're not going to fall off a cliff tomorrow in terms of vaccine efficacy. What we're likely to see is a slow, steady erosion of efficacy over perhaps quite a long period of time.
Benash says to slow this evolutionary process as much as possible, it's important to slow the spread of the virus right now, so people who get vaccinated are at lower risk for getting infected in the first place. Richard Harris, NPR News.
So you walk away from this with the understanding that it's still important to get vaccinated. That's the thing. And you walk away from Joe Rogan's segment thinking, is it really important that I get vaccinated? Or could my vaccination actually be causing some of the problems with the new variants that are coming up?
It was a very interesting part of the discussion there, the conversation between those two guys, that having different vaccines out there actually provides a completely separate layer of protection, because the virus is geared to do a certain thing with one vaccine. But if you have the AstraZeneca or the Johnson & Johnson or the Pfizer, because we have Moderna, you and I, that there is a layer of protection there because of that. I think that's super interesting and certainly not talked about on Joe Rogan's show, because Joe Rogan, there is indeed an agenda there, because he went on to talk about no one's talking about diet, nobody's talking about health, nobody's talking about losing weight, nobody's talking about exercise. What about vitamins, y'all? This episode brought to you by Joe Rogan Vitamins. I mean, that's ultimately where it goes.
Yeah.
Here's that second clip.
They close borders. You can't enter New York City unless you have your papers. You can't go to here unless you have that. You can't get on a plane unless you do what I say. And people say, whoa, it's all about protecting people from the... No, it's not. It's not, because we've shown this is a fact. Just a couple of months ago, the idea of a breakthrough case was unheard of. Nobody heard of anybody catching COVID that had a vaccine, right? That was the whole idea. You get a vaccine, you don't have to worry about it. Now we know not only do you get it, but you can spread it. And some people have died. Apparently, it's a small number. I don't know what the numbers are, but I know that most people who get vaccinated, when they do have the disease, they have a better time of it than the people who are unvaccinated. But where are the people out there calling for people to get healthy? Where are the people out there calling for people to lose weight? 78% of the people in the ICU for COVID are obese. 78%. Where's that information being shared? Where's someone who's a leader who gets on TV and says, ladies and gentlemen, we've got to decrease our body mass. We've got to decrease our fat. We've got to make sure that people aren't overweight. We've got to make sure that people are healthy. Walk around your block. You don't have to do something complicated. Start drinking more water. Stop eating sugar. Start taking vitamins. You can increase the strength of your immune system. We can fight things off better. We can be a healthier civilization. Better for everybody, right? You don't hear a peep. All you hear is take this vaccine that doesn't even prevent you from getting the disease, or you can't go to the sauna or wherever the fuck you want to go. You can't go to the Broadway show.
Big Broadway fan, Joe Rogan.
So again, he kind of mixes some vaccine positivity, vaccine advocacy in with his disinformation campaign. Yeah. And I think that that's what kind of gives him this facade that he's able to hide behind, of acting like he is pro-vaccine. Because he said up front, this isn't anti-vaccine.
Well, of course, that's what he says. And then I'm just asking questions.
Right. And here's a long-term solution, is addressing people's health and fitness, right? That's not something that is immediate. The vaccine is immediate.
Right.
And the more people that get vaccinated, the more we prevent these strains that are no longer going to have effectiveness when it comes to the vaccine.
Well, also, ultimately what he's doing there too is indicating that the reason we have the Delta variant is because of vaccinated people, not because of all of these other ding-dongs who are refusing to get the vaccine, and it's mutating that way. He's raising lots of questions that really don't need to be questions in order that he stoke fear and questions in his audience.
And also, have you heard about his mushroom brain supplement?
Oh, yeah.
That he has.
Neuro gum. I chew this gum that just lights up my neurons.
Yeah.
Ugh.
Goop for men, they say. Goop for men.
It is goop for men. He is the male, what's
Gwyneth
her name?
Paltrow.
Gwyneth Paltrow,
Yes.
right. So there's this other clip that really, it's kind of misaligned here. It doesn't run right in line with these others.
Oh, it absolutely does.
Oh, you
they're
think
talking,
it does?
Yeah, they're talking about skepticism.
Yeah, that's right.
And
So
how
it's
important it is.
It's this Evan Hafer, whatever his name is, the guy who, I mean, we likely could have known each other in high school. That's how closely we were. We were in high school at the same time in adjacent towns. Like if he ran track, we for sure ran on the same track with one another. But
So you guys go way back.
we go way back, yeah. Except he's hawking coffee and loving Donald Trump, talking about skepticism and accountability for our politicians.
Well, it's kind of hilarious that people won't try on skepticism in general. Like, they need to be more skeptical. They need to push people in authority and power and hold them accountable for their words and their actions.
Mr. Lover of Donald Trump, supporter of Donald Trump, has the temerity to say that we need to hold our leaders accountable for their words and their actions. You can get the fuck straight out of here, Evan Hafer, you hypocrite. Unbelievable, the balls.
Can we also talk about,
Goddamn.
because we didn't cover this, but they're acting like this is a new concept, that without vaccination, you cannot do certain things.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
And that this is just like an unbelievable violating the freedom and the liberty. I mean,
My freedom.
what about how you need certain vaccinations to go to school?
Yeah.
Or the vaccination criteria for immigration to the United States?
Yeah.
There's a list of vaccinations that
Yeah.
are required if you're going to come to the United States. So there.
Well, it rings hollow because both of these guys have the polio vaccine. Both of these guys have the measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine. There is a litany of vaccines that both of these ding-dongs have taken, but they're questioning this one because that's the topic du jour.
Yeah.
That's that's the conspiracy du jour, the conflict du jour, the culture war du jour.
Yeah. Well, so there's two things that I want to say just in summary here. There's a Twitter account that says in mice. That's the handle for it. And basically all that account does is find these viral tweets talking about significant findings in health research or whatever it might be, saying that some cure was found or this found, some huge improvement, and they retweet the scientific finding and just say in mice if the study was actually in mice and not in humans.
We should start a Twitter account that's in chickens.
I guess we might have to after this instant. But there was an assignment that I was assigned in grad school.
Wait.
I know.
You were assigned an assignment?
Holy shit, yeah.
Your grad school was way ahead of those other grad schools out there.
I'm good at talking today.
And you gave me shit.
Yeah. Or maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was in my biopsych class. Anyway, I can't remember. It was an assignment and...
Well, you need to look it up. Find your transcript. Figure it out. Because we can't move on until we know specifically.
Okay. So I had to find, throughout the semester, 3 or 4 different news articles summarizing a research article. And I had to compare the news article with the research article and determine the similarities and differences. And inevitably, every time I wrote this paper, there were significant inaccuracies in the news reporting of the scientific paper.
Yeah, in the journalistic account or the review, the summation, they gave the bad information.
Yeah, it was just incorrect, or it wasn't the whole picture. It was just like someone reading the abstract,
It's like there's like, oh, milk is bad, milk is good, milk is bad. A lot of times you'll read the headline from the outlet, what CNN or whatever, and they got it completely wrong.
Yeah, and so here's the thing. It's really time consuming to do this. I mean, I did not want to read about fucking poultry today, and I had to because we wanted to talk about this.
Wait, the article was about having sex with chickens?
Well, okay. That's actually a different article. That's more in line with the morality research that I did in grad school. If you want to know more about that, we can talk more about that. But
that's for another time.
That is for another time. So, but that was a useful exercise to illustrate how you sometimes can't rely on these shorthands. Now, if you find reputable people that communicate effectively about science, that's why you always make fun of me, but I praise Ed Yong, my favorite science writer in The Atlantic. He's fantastic.
I make fun of you that you have a favorite science writer. It's nothing to make fun of. It's just in jest. But I don't know anybody who has a favorite science writer. It's because you're awesome. You're a nerd, but you're awesome. It's a beautiful thing.
So anyway,
but I'm not going to miss a moment to make fun of you.
Yeah. So
what's happening right now?
Anyway, if you find like your and this is what I do. My shorthand is I find people that I trust who are intelligent. I follow them on Twitter, and they help keep me on my toes, and they help educate me and ensure that I'm staying on the right track and help inform me. So I think that's a good way to do it. Now, Joe Rogan is really failing in this area. I mean, if you want someone who's communicating effectively about science, this is not an example of how to do that. And he could have anyone on his show.
Yeah.
He's Joe Rogan. He could have anyone on his show to talk about these issues. He could have platformed the virologist. One of the two men who was interviewed in that NPR clip was a virologist. So Joe Rogan, again, anyone, millions of listeners, substantial platform on Spotify. That's what he could have done.
Yeah.
But he didn't do it. So I would recommend that you have to do your own work in a lot of these situations. And rather than taking what Joe Rogan says as gospel, when he talks about a research article, maybe look it up yourself, read it, try to get access to it, and figure out if what he is actually saying is valid.
Absolutely. All right, we'd love to know what you think about this. You can call, leave us voicemail, 657-464-7609. Of course, you can always email a voice memo from your smartphone like many do. I doubt it, at Dollemore.com.